Would you open your Bibles to Genesis chapter 23 for our lesson this morning? Faith can be an inspiring thing when you see it lived out in the life of young people who are faced with many challenges that our generation did not have to endure. Or when you see it lived in the life of people in their productive and most demanding years of life as they take their faith into the marketplace and live by principles that set them apart and sometimes make them the target of others. But I'm especially appreciative of faith when I see it in the life of older people who are nearing the end of their walk. Place his son a promise on that altar and to offer him as a sacrifice. I can't imagine what had gone through his mind when he got that instruction. But there's nothing stated that makes me think that Abraham cried at that occasion. But when his beloved wife Sarah dies, he cries unashamedly. And he immediately begins to make preparation for her burial. Now, the rest of this chapter tells us about Ephron selling Abraham a cave, the cave of Machpelah, so he could bury his beloved wife, Sarah. And as I read through this, struggle with why would the Spirit of God want to tell us about the negotiation for a piece of land that is owned by this man Ephron, and why Abraham negotiates to buy it. And then there is something about burying her there that also begins to raise to me some serious questions on my part. It's like this. God had promised Abraham when he sent him away from his family to this land, he said, "This is a land of promise and I am going to give it to you." And Abraham had gone into that land. He had sojourned in this land now for more than 6 decades. But until this very point, he doesn't seem to own a square foot of this land. Yet God had said, "I'm going to give it to you." But nothing has happened. So when Sarah dies, he is even in the situation of having to buy some land to bury her. And beyond that is just the impact this must have had when he sees his beloved Sarah die, and God hadn't made good on that promise. They had wandered in this land for these decades, holding to the promise that God made that I'm going to give it to you, but it hadn't happened. Keep your finger here and let's go over to Hebrews chapter 11. There is a most impressive thing about their faith. And I said that right. Hebrews 11 and verse 13, following on the heels of talking about by faith Sarah, this statement is made. These all died in faith without receiving the promises, but having seen them and welcoming them from a distance, and having confessed that they were strangers and exiles on earth. For those who say such a thing make it clear that they're seeking a country of their own. And if indeed they had been thinking what country from which they went out, they would have had opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. My. Abraham and Sarah lived their life clinging to the God and to the promises that He had made. And they never began to see its fulfillment. Not the way that you would have thought. Consequently, God was so proud of them that He was not ashamed to be called their God. So Abraham shows his faith in holding fast to these promises to the degree that he's willing to bury Sarah in a land where he is a stranger, an exile. Now, folks, that doesn't fit the pattern for back then. When someone died, they would be carried back to their homeland. But Abraham operates on the idea that I don't have this promise fulfilled yet, but I believe God, and I'm going to bury Sarah here because ultimately this is her homeland. I admire his faith at the tragic loss of his beloved wife Sarah. Look at chapter 24. Now Abraham was old and advanced in age, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in every way. And Abraham said to his servant, the oldest of his household, who had charge of all that he owned, please place your hand under my thigh, and I will make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and earth, that you shall not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I live, but you shall go to my country and to my relatives and take a wife for my son Isaac. And the servant said to him, suppose the woman will not be willing to follow me in this land. Should I take your son back to the land from where you came? And Abraham said to him, beware lest you take him back there. The Lord, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and from the land of my birth, who swore to me, saying, to your descendants I will give this land, He will send His angel before you, and you will take a wife for my son from there. But if the woman is not willing to follow you, then you will be free from this my oath. Only do not take my son back there. So the servant placed his hand under the thigh of Abraham his master and swore to him concerning this matter. All right. Interesting to me. Fascinating that here in the aftermath of Sarah's death, Abraham begins to think of what's best for his son Isaac. And his decision is to have his servant swear to him. This placing your hand under a thigh, I guess, is sort of like shaking hands on it would be today. Make this commitment, this oath to me, that number one, you will not take a wife for my son from the Canaanites who live around. And number two, you won't take him back to that land. You leave him right here in this land of promise, and you go back there and get a wife for him. I don't have too much trouble understanding why he didn't want him to have a wife of the Canaanites. They didn't believe in the God of heaven. They worship multiple deities. I guess you would call it worship. It was just a degrading lifestyle, really, that got a stamp of approval because they placed the name of a deity on it. But you go back and get a wife for him from that land. Why? Why was that so important to Abraham? And it's finally come clear to me as I've grown older and my kids have married and now have their own families. Isaac was in this land of promise. Abraham had sojourned in this land for decades. There is nothing that makes it clear that Isaac will be the owner of this land any more than Abraham had been. Maybe he is going to have to spend most of his decades sojourning in this land as an exile, as a stranger, a pilgrim. How in the world will he be able to keep holding to this promise that God had made when it hasn't been fulfilled to his father and now doesn't even look like it's going to be fulfilled to him? And the answer to that is he is going to need support. He's going to need a companion, a wife like his mother, a woman of faith. Well, how are you going to find a woman with that kind of faith? You need to find a woman who's willing to do what his mother did. Leave her family, her land, and go into this land that God has promised to operate on faith. Folks, we need to be impressing to our kids the importance of finding life's companion that also shares their faith. It's tough in this world. There are a lot of things pulling us away. And believe it or not, you and I on this earth are strangers and pilgrims. Peter, by the Spirit of God, says that point blank, 1 Peter 2 and verse 11. And as strangers and pilgrims here, we're going to need to support each other, help each other. I love this church. The Sundays I've been able to come. It thrills me to see you supporting one another, encouraging each other. I won't speak for you. I don't know if I could make it through this life if I had to do this by myself. I need you. But in the daily grind of getting along in life, I cannot tell you how important it's been to have a person of faith right there by my side. It's been so important. So Abraham tries to take care of his son in that way. Look at chapter 25. Now, Abraham took another wife whose name was Keturah. And she bore to him Zimram and Jokshan and Medan and Midian and Ishbak and Shua. I also love what happens in these verses. Abraham's an old man. Sarah has died. And somehow along the way he meets this woman whose name is Keturah. And he marries her. A couple of the churches that I have preached for in my life have had large groups of singles. And what that means is there have been times that I've done a lot of weddings. As many as 6 in 15 days on one occasion when we lived in Houston. It's always fun to watch couples meet and fall in love. Some of my favorite weddings have been those that I've conducted for older people who've lost their companions in death and who decide that they're going to spend at least as much of the rest of their life with some other person as they can. And they meet someone and they fall in love. I've got to tell you a story. When I'd moved to Pleasant Valley, hadn't been there a long time, we had that bad winter of 1977 where there were just a series, seems like, of sleet and snowstorms that hit Little Rock. One of our older men, God love him, had served as an elder at one time before his wife died. Brother Land, well up into his 80s. Brother Land decided that winter he would be sure that the widows who couldn't get out and drive on those slick streets wouldn't starve, so he'd call them up, go pick them up, take them to the grocery store. One of our widows was a sweet lady named Sister Duff, as proper of an elderly lady as you'd ever see, like him, well up into her 80s. Came to church every Sunday wearing a hat and white gloves. I mean, she was dressed to the nines every week. And I noticed one Sunday that they actually sat together, and then on Monday night, It was about 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. I'd just gone to bed and the phone rang. It was Brother Land, and he had a distinctive voice. I knew instantly. He said, "Preacher?" "Yes, Brother Land." "You doing anything Friday afternoon?" No, not that I know of. Why?" "Sister Duff and I are going to get married in your office, and we want you to do it." "Okay, I'll be glad to." "Now, don't say anything to anybody." "All right, I won't." Wednesday night, about the same time, 10:30, 10:45 at night, I'd gone to bed, and the phone rang again. It was Brother Land. "Preacher?" "Yes, Brother Land." "I forgot to ask you, did I say anything Monday night about a wedding ring?" "No, Brother Land, you didn't." "Well, good. I told her that ring that first husband gave her was good enough if she wanted to just keep wearing it." So, I tell you, I love some of our older folks. They're such dears. He had already figured out that there was no way in the world. He had been so happy in his first marriage. He just couldn't find a way to be happy without being married. That Friday afternoon, it was a joy. And Abraham marries this woman, Keturah, and they start having sons. And did you catch those names? I wonder if maybe this is some early symptoms of Alzheimer's, the names that he picks for them. And look at verse 5. Abraham gave all that he had to Isaac, but to the sons of his concubines, Abraham gave gifts while he was still living and sent them away from his son Isaac eastward to the land of the east. He had learned the lesson from Ishmael. The son of promise is the one who will live in the promised land. So without God's prompting, he goes ahead and sends these boys away at the appropriate time. These are all the years of Abraham's life that he lived. 175 years. And Abraham breathed his last and died in a ripe old age, an old man, satisfied with life, and he was gathered to his people. A beautiful way of saying that. An old man full of years. As you read through this, you know what he's been doing since he married Keturah. He's been doing his business, conducting his affairs, enjoying his family, serving God, getting ready for this day when he's gathered to his people. Now I want to give you 3 things to take away with you. Number 1, death is a reality. Prepare for it. You written your will? Have you already made arrangements for what's going to happen when you die? Or are you going to leave it to somebody else to buy your Macpila? You can do them a great favor by stepping in now. You know, the amazing thing to me, when Abraham is an old man and he's caring for his family and doing the things that he needs to do and preparing for his death, he is in effect helping that son Isaac. In fact, the last verse of chapter 24 says, "Then Isaac brought her, Rebekah, into his mother Sarah's tent, and he took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. Thus Isaac was comforted after his mother's death." Death is a certainty. Abraham was just helping Isaac to face death. We've got 2 grown daughters. They each have their own families. I think back to the time that they were little and we trained them and watched them grow up, and I cannot tell you how proud we are of them. Both them and their spouses are faithful Christians. I know right now that all of them are in church in their respective congregations at this very moment. I haven't called them today, hadn't checked with them. I just know that that's where they are. No doubt at all. And I know as I think back to the training of them, what my wife and I tried to do in helping them to develop into their own person, have their own faith. And I look back and there's a sense of accomplishment, but then I realize I've still got one more lesson that I need to be teaching them. I need to be teaching them how to face death through my own, or teaching them how to, at some day I'll need to teach them how to live through the loss of life's companion, one or the other. One of those lessons I'll be called upon to teach. It's what Abraham was doing. Death is a reality. Get ready for it. Second, life is a blessing. Treasure it. It just breaks my heart to see people who quit living before they die. Life is such a blessing. This is the day the Lord has made. Rejoice and be glad in it. There is something that is just so uplifting about being around people who love life. Back after World War II, before television hit the marketplace, radio was king, and the king of radio was a little short fella by the name of Jimmy Durante. He had a weekly radio program that people from one coast to another would stop what they were doing, gather around their radios, and listen to that program. One of his friends was a fellow by the name of Ed Sullivan, who liked to present new talent in his program, but he, beyond that, had invested a lot of his energy in trying to, in his way of expressing appreciation to the soldiers who were returning from war, would host them in his theater and would invite entertainers to come and to share their performances with them. Ed Sullivan kept trying to get Jimmy Durante to appear at one of these programs where the audience would be made up of these war veterans who had returned home. And they never could quite work out the logistics of how Durante could be there and get across Manhattan to the radio studio so he could present his own program. And Sullivan just kept after him, and finally one day Durante said, "I'll do it on one condition. You have to guarantee that I will be able to get from your theater to the radio station so I can do my radio program." Sullivan said, "Our people will work that out." And they worked with the New York police and everyone to make sure that it happened. And it came the night for this performance. Sullivan introduces Jimmy Durante, the curtains open, and he steps out to his piano to start to play the one song that he was going to have time to play before he would have to be whisked away for his own radio program. Sullivan steps behind the curtain and listens, and when the number is over, there's just thunderous applause and cheering. The crowd loved him. And just as he's ready to step out to thank him, he hears the piano, and Durante's starting another song. And he listens to it, and at the conclusion of it, again, thunderous applause, and he thinks, it's time. And he starts to step out again, just as Durante starts another song. Pretty soon he's played for a whole half hour. And the audience is cheering and celebrating his being there. And finally, he walks off the stage. And as he does, Ed Sullivan grabs him by the collar and says, "Jimmy, what were you thinking? You know now there is no way I can get you to the radio station. Why did you do that?" And Durante said, "Why? I'll show you why." And he pulled back the curtains. And sitting on the very front row, there were two soldiers. Both of them had lost an arm in battle. And they were applauding him. One was using his left hand, the other his right hand. And they were applauding Durante's performance in that way. And Durante said, "Look, you see that? There is something inspiring about being around people who refuse to give up on life. Life is a treasure. Value it." And then finally, death is or eternity is a reality. Be ready for it. Death is a certainty. Life is a treasure. Eternity is a reality. The Sadducees came to Jesus. Man died, brother married her, he died, next brother, no descendants. In the resurrection, whose wife will she be? Jesus says, "You err not knowing the truth or the power of God." Then he makes this statement. God said, "I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." He's not the dead or the God of the dead, but the living. Abraham's still living. That was Jesus' whole point. When you read this chapter, understand, Abraham did not leave the land of the living to go to the place of the dead. He left the land of the dying to go to the place of the living. And so also will we. Are you ready for that? You need to come to him, then do it as we stand and sing.